It was just past midnight when the silence over southern Israel shattered. A single streak of fire tore through the night sky, unmistakable, deliberate, and devastating. Within seconds, the missile struck the heart of an IDF base, igniting a chain of destruction that would leave the region reeling. The blast was so intense that it registered on seismic monitors across the border. What followed wasn't just an explosion, it was a message. Iran had launched a direct hit, and the consequences were catastrophic. The base, known for housing elite reconnaissance units, was caught off guard. Most soldiers were asleep, their defenses lowered, their routines unbroken. In an instant, over 300 lives were lost. The barracks collapsed like paper under the force, and emergency response teams scrambled through debris, searching for survivors. It was the deadliest single strike in the history of the Israel-Iran conflict. But this wasn't just a military failure, it was a psychological rupture. Israel's Iron Dome, long hailed as impenetrable, had faltered. The missile had slipped through, undetected and unchallenged. For many Israelis, the night marked a turning point. The illusion of invincibility had cracked, and the specter of vulnerability loomed large. Iranian state media celebrated the strike as a precision retaliation, citing previous Israeli air raids on Tehran and Khuzestan. But international observers warned of escalation. The question wasn't whether Israel would respond, it was how and how soon. As dawn broke, the world watched a new chapter unfold, one written in fire and grief. The aftermath was surreal. As emergency sirens wailed and helicopters circled overhead, the base transformed into a war zone of twisted metal and scorched earth. Families of the fallen were notified in waves, each call a dagger. The Israeli Defense Forces, known for their rapid response and layered defense systems, were now grappling with the unthinkable. A breach so deep, it shook the core of national security. In Tehran, the mood was starkly different. Crowds gathered in the streets, waving flags and chanting slogans. State television replayed the missile launch on loop, framing it as a triumph of resistance. Iranian officials claimed the strike was a direct response to covert Israeli operations that had targeted nuclear scientists and military installations. For them, this was not just retaliation, it was justice. But beneath the celebration lay a deeper strategy. Iran's missile wasn't just a weapon, it was a signal. Precision, timing, and psychological impact were all calculated. The fact that it struck at night, when visibility was low and defenses were relaxed, was no accident. It was a demonstration of capability and a warning of what could come next. Meanwhile, global powers scrambled to respond. The United States condemned the attack but urged restraint. Russia, with its growing ties to Tehran, called for regional stability, while subtly shifting blame toward Israeli aggression. The UN Security Council convened an emergency session, but consensus was elusive. The world was watching, but few were willing to intervene. Inside Israel, the mood turned from grief to fury. Military analysts dissected the failure, politicians demanded accountability, and citizens braced for retaliation. The question wasn't if Israel would strike back, it was when and how hard. The balance of power in the Middle East had shifted overnight, and the tremors were only beginning. The funerals began at sunrise. Rows of coffins draped in Israeli flags lined the military cemetery, each one a symbol of sacrifice and shock. Families clung to one another, their grief raw and unfiltered. Soldiers stood in silence, their faces etched with disbelief. This wasn't just a loss, it was a rupture in the national psyche. For a country built on resilience, the scale of devastation was almost too much to process. Across the border, Iranian commanders released footage of the missile launch, showcasing the technology and precision behind the strike. Analysts noted the use of a new generation of ballistic missile, long-range, radar-evading, and capable of pinpoint accuracy. It wasn't just a show of force, it was a declaration of advancement. Iran had evolved, and its military capabilities were no longer theoretical, they were proven. Israeli intelligence scrambled to trace the launch origin. Satellite imagery, Intercepted communications and drone surveillance painted a chilling picture. The missile had been fired from a concealed silo deep within Iranian territory, bypassing early detection systems. The implications were staggering. If Iran could strike with such precision once, it could do so again. And next time, the target might not be a military base, it could be a city. Public discourse in Israel turned volatile. News anchors demanded answers, opposition leaders called for resignations, and social media erupted with fury. The IDF, once seen as untouchable, now faced scrutiny. How did this happen? Who was responsible? And what would be done to ensure it never happened again? Meanwhile, whispers of retaliation grew louder. Military convoys mobilized, Air Force squadrons prepped for deployment, and diplomatic channels buzzed with urgency. The nation was grieving, but it was also preparing. The strike had awakened something deeper, a resolve to respond, and to respond decisively. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Israel's war cabinet convened in an underground bunker. The mood was electric, tense, calculated, and unflinching. Intelligence chiefs laid out satellite maps, intercepted signals, and retaliatory options. The Prime Minister, flanked by military advisors, listened in silence. Then came the directive, "We respond tonight." It wasn't just about vengeance, it was about restoring deterrence. The operation was codenamed Iron Echo. Within hours, Israeli fighter jets roared into the sky, slicing through the darkness toward Iranian military infrastructure. The targets were carefully chosen: missile silos, command centers, and radar stations. Precision strikes lit up the desert, and within minutes, the message was clear. Israel was not backing down. But the retaliation wasn't limited to missiles. Cyber units launched coordinated attacks on Iranian power grids and communication networks. Tehran plunged into partial blackout. Banks froze, air traffic stalled, and panic spread. It was a new kind of warfare, silent, invisible, and devastating. Meanwhile, the global response fractured. European leaders called for de-escalation, while Gulf states quietly applauded Israel's resolve. On social media, hashtags like #NightOfFire and #EchoStrike trended worldwide. The narrative was no longer just about a missile, it was about a region on the brink. Inside Iran, the government scrambled to maintain control. State media downplayed the damage, but leaked footage told another story. Chaos in command centers, confusion among troops, and rising civilian unrest. Protesters took to the streets, demanding answers. The strike had not only hit military targets, it had shaken the regime's grip. And yet, both sides knew this was far from over. The exchange had opened a new front, one where missiles and malware shared the battlefield. The question now wasn't who would strike next, but how far each was willing to go before the world stepped in. By morning, the region had changed. The missile strike, the retaliation, the cyber blackout, each event layered upon the next, forming a mosaic of conflict that no longer felt distant or abstract. It was real, visceral, and unfolding in real time. News outlets across the globe ran continuous coverage, analysts debated scenarios, and ordinary citizens braced for what might come next. In Israel, the narrative shifted from mourning to mobilization. Recruitment centers saw a surge in volunteers, many driven by grief, others by a sense of duty. IDF released footage of successful retaliatory strikes, framing them as a restoration of strength. Yet behind the scenes, there was unease. Military leaders knew that Iran's strike wasn't a fluke. It was a calculated move in a broader game. And games like these don't end with a single exchange. Iran, too, recalibrated. Its leadership faced internal pressure as the blackout exposed vulnerabilities. While the regime projected defiance, cracks were visible. Civil unrest simmered, and whispers of dissent grew louder. The missile had struck Israel, but Israel's response had pierced deeper than expected. And so the world watches, not just for the next missile, but for the next misstep. Diplomats shuttle between capitals, trying to stitch together a fragile thread of peace. But the damage is done. Trust is eroded, tempers are high, and the threshold for escalation has lowered. This wasn't just a military clash. It was a signal that the rules have changed. Technology, timing, and psychological warfare now define the battlefield. And in this new era, the night sky is no longer a blanket of peace. It's a canvas of uncertainty. The missile fell, the lives were lost, and the silence that follows is louder than the blast.